Hi guys, welcome back aboard our 44-foot hurricane damaged catamaran DIY project boat. 2 weeks ago I started working on our keels. Unfortunately last week that progress ground to a halt because I found some leaks. The 2 keels are still at the very top of my to-do list, but to get started on those, this week we're gonna have to tear into the head. This week's video is sponsored by Surfshark. More about them a little bit later. Before I start digging into the head, there is an upcoming project I just want to get started on, mainly because I'm going to have to ask for your guys' help. This is one of the 2 hatches that sits here on the now very dusty tramp ramp. I think there is some kind of delamination going on inside of the 2 old hatches because they are very floppy. In particular, the other hatch is pretty beat up. I could fair out that damage, stiffen them up, and then use the 2 parts to make molds for the new parts. But I want to try something else, something cool and exciting. My plan for this otherwise somewhat boring project is to take a 3D scan of both of the hatches, import that into my CAD software of choice, and then make the molds for the new parts in CAD, and then have those CNC cut so that I can lay up the new parts. That gives me a couple of big benefits, like for instance, I can modify this area where the hinge sits so that if I can't get the original hinges, easy peasy. I've never used a 3D scanner before. It's kind of fun. It's kind of like painting a picture, but with a camera, if that makes sense. As you can see here, I put down some little tracking dots, and that seemed to help a lot. After a little bit of trial and error, here is my scanned part. And I think this looks like a perfectly usable scan. Now for the portion of this segment where I'm gonna have to ask for a little bit of help. While I've got a good scan here and I think my CAD skills are good enough to make the mold in CAD, what I don't have is a CNC machine, so the actual thing I need to make the mold. I'm hoping one of you guys that might be local to the Melbourne, Orlando, Cape Canaveral area will have access to a CNC and don't mind me swinging by for a few hours and hanging out for a little bit. The mold is going to be made out of MDF, so it's not going to be hard to machine or anything like that. But yeah, I'll include my email down in the description. We'll get back to this project and the whole 3D scanning thing in a dedicated upcoming video. I am super excited to finally have a 3D scanner. I imagine just a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be so much easier. Like for instance, an alternator mount. If you have all the geometry in CAD, that's going to be so much easier. But yeah, let's get back on track. In last week's video, we found what I think is a leak from the deck hull joint in the head, or behind the molded part or the liner that makes up the head. Last week when I shoved my little pokey camera in between the deck and the false ceiling or the headliner, I think this is what I saw. There is the head module, which is a separate molded part that makes up the shower and everything else you see in the head today. Now that is lowered into the boat before the deck is put on, and it looks like it's then glassed to the hull. If what I saw, and that's a pretty substantial if, but if that was correct, then with a little bit of luck, we might just be able to cut out the headliner or the false ceiling here to get access to the joint. I adorned the dork helmet and squeezed into the head. I decided to leave myself a little flange in the hopes that I might be able to secure the new ceiling to that. After a quick bit of cutting, I got a good look at the deck hull joint and saw something I wasn't expecting. Daylight. I think it's safe to say we've found the leak. This week I'm going to be going in and out of the head a lot, so the first thing I did was to put the floorboards back to not brave the pit of certain death every time I go into the head. A slight challenge is the fact that I don't have all of the original bits and pieces of the floor in the starboard hull. This was the side of the boat that was submerged for quite a bit of time after the hurricane. But after a quick visit to the tool trailer, I was able to modify what I could find. This will make a huge difference in going in and out of the head. Of course, this booby trap is a ticking time bomb, but nothing a couple of 3-inch screws won't fix. I know full and well that this looks like poop, but ta-da! Progress made. Sometimes life throws us a curveball. That could be something like seeing daylight through your deck hull joint, or it could be evil people wanting to take control of your electronic devices. And that brings us to the sponsor of this week's video, Surfshark, who currently have an amazing Black Friday deal. Surfshark is a VPN, or a virtual private network. Some people use a VPN to change their virtual location to be able to enjoy their favorite streaming content from anywhere in the world. While definitely less entertaining than binge watching a good show, Ava and I used Surfshark on multiple occasions while cruising to help her parents submit some insurance forms. The websites we were trying to access were locked down so that only computers inside of the US could access them. But thanks to Surfshark and the click of a button, we could easily virtually put ourselves in the US. So whether it be for business or fun, thanks to Surfshark and their 3,000 servers in over 100 countries, you can basically put yourself virtually anywhere in the world. In a few days, I am gonna fly up to Michigan to spend Thanksgiving with Ava and her parents. During that trip, I will have what I'm sure will be a fascinating 4-hour layover. During that, I'm gonna bust out the Surfshark app and quickly connect to the VPN while connected to public Wi-Fi to help protect myself, as public Wi-Fi is a goldmine for hackers. Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there is no risk to try it out. Go to surfshark.com/saillive for an extra 4 months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price with their current Black Friday deal. This is a time-limited offer, so check it out right now. This deck hole joint leak, and especially the fact that I could see daylight, was a little bit of an unexpected surprise. Whenever something unexpected happens, I feel like I do my best thinking or problem solving doing something else. Something that doesn't require a lot of thought. Something that keeps the hands busy but the mind blank. Like, for instance, building this mysterious box for the tool trailer. But it's not just any box. No, this has a false back in it, it's got holes for cable management, and it's even built to be a floating box of sorts. A 10 out of 10 box if I ever saw one. Ta-da! May I present the Procrastinator Box 2000. This is a little charging area for all of our camera batteries, our mics, stuff like that. I also built this little guy up here. It's a little holding area for all of our Gorilla pods. I'm glad I took that little detour and got a chance to think about what I wanted to do with the deck hole joint. And I think I've come up with a plan. But for that plan to work, we're gonna have to take to the skies. I can't help but compare this thing to the one I had back in Denmark during Athena's refit, and this guy seems a little bit more wobbly, but at least he's a nice safety yellow. Yep, so yellow, so nice and safe. My hope for the deck hole joint here is that I'll be able to maybe open up the joint a little bit, which looks like it'll be very possible. And then see if I can get the old sealant out so I can squeeze some new sealant in there. That's step 1 of the plan. And then step 2 is going to be on the inside of the boat, where I might be able to add just a little more sealant on the inside and then maybe also glass the inside. But that kind of depends on how the bulkhead is attached relative to the deck hole joint. But we'll take a look at that later. I set to work with Mr. Oscillating Multi-Tool. I'm not using him to cut the sealant, but just to break it down into chunks that I can remove. I'm not going to lie, pulling out the chunks, especially the bigger ones, was very rewarding. By folding over a piece of 80 grit sanding net, I was able to wedge it into the joint and sand both sides. Before opening up too much of the deck hole joint, I ran back inside the boat to check. The bulkheads are tabbed to both the deck and the hull, meaning the deck won't lift near the bulkheads. Also, the rest of the joint is glassed on the inside. What you're seeing here is a single layer of glass they added for some reason, but behind it you can see the glassed joint. A little further aft is a much better look at the inside of the joint. This is awesome. I wish the entire boat was glassed like this. I decided to open up the shower area too. I think it's a good idea to get a good look at what's going on in there. There is very little room back there. If I want to glass the inside of the joint, I'm afraid the head will have to get a visit from Mr. Sawsaw. After copious amounts of sealant removal and sanding, I jumped back on deck and cleaned the areas around the holes in preparation of applying new sealant. At great expense, I picked up fasteners at West Marine to help close up the joint and keep it closed. Applying the sealant was a slightly messy business, and an electric caulk gun is definitely on the wish list for the tool trailer. I'll give my efforts from yesterday around an 80% chance of actually being successful. There are other ways I can fix the leak if this doesn't work, but it makes sense to try the path of least resistance first. Let's turn on the Rainmaker 2000 and see if we were successful. It is very convenient to be able to make it rain whenever you want to for finding leaks. I should probably have picked up the Rainmaker 2000 way sooner. So far, dry down there, but it's only been a minute. It's been 12 minutes since I started the Rainmaker 2000, and that's about 4 or 5 times longer than it's ever taken for the leak to reveal itself in my past testing. So let's take a look. And bone dry. That is freaking awesome. And we can add to that there is no sign of any leaks up at the joint. Woohoo! And what might my reward be for such a sweet, sweet success and major milestone? Well, I get to grind fiberglass and glass in the second sump. It appears Christmas came early. A somewhat sucky Christmas, but still. The astute will have noted the peel ply on the sump piece. That is because I laid up the top skin a few days ago. Anywho, let's not waste time here. I lowered myself back into the abyss and repeated all the steps from the port sump installation, including making a cardboard template with a liberal amount of hot glue to get the exact shape and size of the opening. I trimmed the sump piece to size and was able to get a nice snug fit. I decided to also repeat the deck hull exercise from the starboard hull over on the port hull. This time I didn't open up the ceiling in the head, I just took a stab at it from the outside. Time will tell if this worked. Yesterday I only glued the sump piece in place because I want to batch some fiberglass work. The reason I want to batch the fiberglass work is so that we use less consumables like cups, stir sticks, that kind of stuff. Here on the board we have a task called Raised Rings for Inspection Ports. Let's cue that one up. Water can get into our keels in several ways. No matter how it gets in there, when it gets in there, I'd like to be able to get it out of there in an easy fashion. So I'm going to be installing 2 of these inspection ports. While we are on the topic of the keels, I've gotten a couple of comments asking if I wasn't going to add foam to the keels, meaning pour in expanding polyurethane foam. I'm not, and there are some good reasons for that. While in theory, the idea behind having polyurethane foam inside of the keels is great because you won't get water in, what happens in reality is that polyurethane foam, when there is a leak in there, slowly absorbs that water, and then over time you just end up with a super heavy, soggy sponge that's just a nightmare to remove. Sure, if the keels had been designed to actually have a core to give them the strength they need, I would definitely be adding some kind of foam to them. But these keels are designed to be hollow. And I just don't see much of an upside to adding the polyurethane foam. If we manage to punch a hole in the keel, then sure, polyurethane foam could slow the water ingress. But in our case, we already have a secondary barrier in the shape of that false bottom that's glassed at the top of the keel. So if we manage to punch a hole in the keel, then that is most likely going to stop any water ingress. So in our case, I don't think adding polyurethane foam is worth the trouble. While I'm in Q&A mode, I also got a few comments asking why there was no ballast in the keels, why they were just empty. Catamarans don't have ballast, so that's why they were empty. Monohulls, they have ballast. They have ballast to counter the weight of the mast and everything else to keep the boat upright. Catamarans, on the other hand, they're so wide, they don't need ballast, they have width. But unfortunately, that brings up one of the big downsides to a catamaran, and that's the fact that it has 2 stable positions in the water. There's this one, which is the fun one, the one we want, and then there's this one, which is the one we absolutely don't want. So rule number 1 of Catamaran Club is don't flip the friggin' boat, right, Dale? But yeah, let's get back on track. Let's get started on the inspection port rings. I have a problem, a tool addiction problem. I have yet to pass up a good excuse to buy a new tool. But in my defense, I will definitely need a thickness planer for when I start rebuilding the interior. The foam I had is ½ inch thick. That is too thick. I think it'll look much nicer being about half that thickness. Hence, the easiest meal Mr. Thickness Planer is probably ever going to enjoy. I took great care and made a big deal out of making some nice rings. After ever so much deliberation and fine-tuning, I had not just one ring, but 2 rings. A great success. Or, no, actually the complete opposite of that, because I realized my beautiful rings are too big to fit. Oh well, the king is dead. Long live the slightly smaller king. This worked out much better, although in hindsight I should have gotten the inspection ports one size smaller. I cut all the glass I would need and set to work glassing in the sump. It only took about 30 seconds before I realized that I should have removed the diesel tank prior to this adventure. There is just not enough room to work comfortably, but at this point I was kinda committed. Ahoy guys! It is I, Captain Dum-Dum, back for another appearance. My beautiful plan of glassing in those rings yesterday to batch the fiberglass work did not work out. It is far too cramped in the starboard hull for me to be able to do that. But today is a new day, and today my goal is to get those blessed rings glassed in. I did get the rings adhered in place yesterday. That should help me out a little bit today, but I think we'll use the port one over here as an example, because with the diesel tank removed here, it is way easier for me to fit. Because it was easier to get a perfect circle, I ended up using a flush cutting bit on the ring to make this guy. So he's the exact same size as the inspection port. The problem is this is a 90-degree corner, so to lay up glass I am going to have to put down some fillet here. Of course I also need to sand this shiny stuff out of the way, but yeah, let's get started. I gave the areas around the rings a light sanding to ensure a good bond. Using thickened epoxy, I made a fillet and took great care to shape it. Normally when you use a fillet, it just gets smushed when you lay up glass, and the shape of it is not super important. But my only chance to get this glass to conform to the shape without vacuum backing is to allow the thickened epoxy to gel first, so it becomes super sticky. That and perhaps a couple of relief cuts in the glass. After about an hour, the thickened epoxy had firmed up, but was still super tacky. With the 2 layers in place, I waited about another hour and then brushed on a coat of epoxy to fill the texture of the glass. We'll get back to that next week. Both rings are in and I think it worked out, but I should really get set up for vacuum backing sometime in the very near future. But I realized that I didn't tell you why I'm putting in the rings. There is only one reason, and that is to make absolutely sure if I ever see water inside of the keel, I will know for sure it's not because the sealant around this flange here has failed, because that's raised up above where any water that trickles past is going to be. Here's another little cross section. The little square here, that's the ring. The blue thing is the inspection port. Water is not going to get up here to the inspection port. It's going to run down here when the boat is just sitting nice and still. So if I ever see a ton of water in the keel, I'll know for sure that it's some other issue. Of course, I could have just drilled a hole in the false floor up there, bummed this in with plenty of sealant and relied on that sealant. But if living on boats for the past 12 years has taught me anything, it's that anything you can do to limit where a leak can come from so that you'll have an easier time finding out where the leak is coming from when there is a leak, that is time well spent. So hence the rings. It's been a good week here on the catamaran, so there are some tasks we can close. We have the raised rings in place. We also have the sump boxes in place. And seeing as we have now, hopefully 99% sure, solved the deck hull joint leaks, well, the keels should be nice and dry. Next week I am going to prep the engine compartment and that whole section underneath the soles for paint. I don't know if we'll be able to paint next week. That depends on if we find any more damage, but that is the plan. And on that bit of lovely optimism, I'll end this week's video here. I hope to see all of you guys back here aboard the catamaran next week for yet more glorious DIY fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you! Boop.